making mistakes. What is learning? Learning is,
and that becomes a barrier for my kids.
Absolutely.
My fear is becoming a barrier between, and they know it.
I agree, and let's not kid ourselves. Introducing this new variable into the classroom creates fundamental changes to the dynamics. If you think of an ecosystem, if all of a sudden you introduce a new species, all sorts of things are going to happen. But in the same sort of way, I would argue, it's much more dangerous to pretend this stuff isn't happening and leave it outside the school rather than confront yourself.
I've kept a caption in my class. There is nothing permanent but change. We have to change every time.
And one of the things that I find my students are particularly welcoming is when they can actually tell me, teach me some things and say, no, you don't want to do it like this, you want to do it like that. And all I do is say thanks, great,
great.
I've learned something now and I can use that. So it's that sort of an attitudinal thing. And then of course, authenticity of material and tasks is also a big thing we've already talked about. Look at this room. Is this environment conducive to learning? Well, in a sense, it's cooler than outside at the end. But but in terms of maybe we're gonna call this an educational technology. The air conditioning.
Looking at Master Ayub, this is quite conducive.
So they're poor. They are very poor. Because they are artificial, they are not the real thing, and they've got very little sort of stimulus. So anything we can do to augment that is a good thing. Let's just very quickly. We've talked about the fact that ICT makes possible new forms of classroom practice, and here are some examples of that. Creates possibilities of a wide variety of learning practices. It impacts on learning in various different ways. In the coordination of learning, whereby distinct activities can be integrated better. The continuity of learning, whereby distinct episodes or sites of learning can be integrated. And through community, where it's used to mediate the links between different people, their interests or activities. So, I think that's quite a useful and interesting thing to hold on to. It can help in terms of differentiation, inspiration, coherence and engagement. And here just a couple of slides that I've come across recently. There's obviously, depending on what technology you have, all sorts of different patterns are possible for organizing interactions. And here we've got a classic, we've got front-facing. So that's one way in which technology can be useful, but at the same time, all it does is it reinforces my power over you. Because I'm in full charge and this stuff helps me to be in charge. It lends authority to what I say. It makes me much bigger than I am, towering on you. It's bright, it focuses your attention. It does all sorts of things. And for some types of activity that's quite good. For others, not so. So it's a matter of playing around with and thinking about other ways of organizing the classroom. And traditionally, particularly computers, have been useless. Why have they been useless? Because they are bulky, they got plugs, they need electricity, they can only position in certain things. Now, usually, you got massive screens that stop you from sort of seeing who else is in the room, and all sorts of things. As things get smaller, we can start to experiment with different things. So it's simply to say that don't underestimate actually the importance of where this thing sits within the classroom and how therefore it facilitates or otherwise social interaction with people. Yes, sure.
Just said that front facing,
yes.
No doubt, it is making the teacher more authoritative and teacher more centered.
Yeah.
But in some respect it is useful. Like it is making creating good listeners as well. And if you want that some good listeners in your class, sometimes it is required. So front facing helps to create good listeners.
Yes, but then if you look at the research, that would suggest that through listening you learn 5%. Through listening you learn 5%. Through being actively engaged.
But I'm saying that it has to be integrated.
I agree.
It can't be like only front facing. All the activities should be integrated together, so that okay, for 5 minutes it can be front facing. Then later on it can be debated.
We're on the same page.
When you're working in a group, interacting with other people, you are developing 4, 5 or 6 lines of conversation. And it's, I think, much better than like you know, facing one person and listening.
What else happened? Oh, this is actually quite interesting. Again, based on this piece of research, which just came out in September, hot off the press, what they did is they observed 85 lessons in various different schools and looked at the ways in which technology was being used and what impact it had on teaching and learning. I'm afraid because the quality is so poor here, I'll have to read this out. This is the frequency of occurrence. So you have things like scripted inquiry, happens that often, simulation, collaboration, participation, performance, assessment, exposition, what I'm doing, telling things, reflection, construction, ludic, playful engagement, representation, rehearsal, search. So these are in normal classroom situations out of a whole range of types of learning practices that you might encounter and that might be important. These are the sort of explanation for us then as educators. We need to start to think, so what can we do in order to bring about problem-based learning? And I think one or two mentioned this thing of field trip, going out there, collecting data, working out. There's all sorts of ways you can do group work to make this happen. But I thought this was quite an interesting thing to show you in terms of the types of thing and how that maps. So representation is quite important here. And obviously we ought to try and, otherwise we used to talk about death by worksheet in the UK, then we started to talk about death by PowerPoint, and I think that's what this, the more slides you got, the more you force your students into submission, because after the 10th one they lose the will to live, and then they don't disrupt it. So are we really wanting to use technology for that, and are we harnessing the real potential of technology? No, let's just see whether there's anything else. So that's the last thing. Now, before I want to set you another little task that I want to talk about, and that is, we've talked a lot about us as teachers and the implications of school. But there's some very interesting studies out there, both among ordinary young people as well as higher education students in different contexts, that tries to find out what do students actually use technology for. Because arguably, if you want to maximize the effect of technology, one of the things you want to try and do is start from where your learners are. Okay, you can sort of teach them new stuff, that's fine, but if you start off by what they're already comfortable with and what they're already doing, it's probably more likely to be quicker, more effective, and yield more benefits. And here's a study that was carried out amongst higher education students in the UK, undergraduates. And this, I'm not saying that it's going to be exactly the same with your students, but what I'm saying is it's a useful exercise to undertake, to actually find out where they are. So one thing the study found was technology use was pervasive. Basically, they used it for everything. Absolutely everything. To support all aspects of study. And this didn't look at whether they wrote love SMSs to their boyfriends or girlfriends. This was about using it for learning, or for studying. They do all sorts of other things with it as well, no doubt. But this is just for all aspects of study, finding information, communicating with that, for all these sorts of things they used. They were interested in stuff that was personalized, things that allowed them to meet their own perceived needs. And that's one of the reasons why students, by and large, tend not to like a particular technology that we've talked about earlier on, starting with a V, LE, because it's rigid. Yeah? What they much prefer is social networking tools with a similar sort of functionality, but they're in charge, they're in control, and all of that. Yeah? So we need to ask ourselves, what can we do to facilitate that? Yeah? Niche adaptive. So particular tools are used for specific purposes. But no, we don't need to buy in the full product range from one particular provider. We just need this particular thing. That's used for a purpose, and for another purpose, they're quite happy to use something completely different. Organized technologies are used in a sophisticated manner to find and manage information. So by and large, the information literacy of students in this context was relatively high. Transferable skills gained through non-education use of technologies are applied to learning contexts. And I think that's quite interesting here to work with young people on that. Time-space boundaries, changes to where and how students are working are in evidence. And I can see that of myself. There has been no time in my entire working life, even when I did my PhD in understanding, that I've used library resources more than now. But equally, there hasn't been a time in my professional life when I've been less frequently in libraries. Don't go there. Why don't I go there? Because I access everything through my computer, and I've got complete different, but it's all library provided resources. Yeah? I wouldn't need the library to have all these sort of acres and acres of space unless they needed it for books and stuff. So it's, and I think that's really also a matter of importance in reflecting the wealth of information that's available, the form in which it is available, and how can we do that. And then clearly the time-space thing. Yeah? I've given a little example of that already, but what I can do is I can access my email, say for the sake of argument, not through my web-based email account, but through a client that allows me to download everything. I've got it there. Then when I have some time, like on the aeroplane over here to Islamabad, I can spend 7 hours working on that. Whereas 2-3 years ago, I'd be sitting there watching the stupid films that I was being